In the previous movie, we gave an overview of the different functions available in the steady-state fate ultra-random analog, or URA. In this movie, I'm going to focus on the sample and hold sections. The idea of a sample and hold is that it samples an incoming voltage, then holds it for as long as the gate says to keep that signal. Then when there's a new gate high, it says resample the input, and now we have a new output voltage. So it's a way of breaking up a smoothly fluctuating input to create discretely stepped outputs. The URA has two sample and holds and a way of toggling in between them to create a third. I'm going to play around with sample and hold A first. I already have its output going to the green trace of the scope. I'm going to turn on my drone on the Moog. And the most typical sample and hold output is to use it to control pitch to create crazy sci-fi sounds. So I'm going to take the output from my keyboard and instead route it to the sample and hold output, and start increasing the input or the voltage that's being sampled. In this case, it's a noise source internal to the URA. The clock is telling me how fast to sample it, and that's that pink LED there. So as I turn up the sample level, you'll hear the pitch start to change. As I turn up the level of the input, I have a wider range of voltages on the input, and therefore a wider range of output voltages going to the oscillators. Let's go ahead and speed up the clock. And open up the cutoff so you can hear that more clearly. Now it's going to a very wide octave range. Let's go ahead and pull down the range a bit here, because the oscillators are tracking 1 volt per octave, and it's 2 volts for every division on the data. Now that is a bit, well, random. Well, one way to clean that up is to feed the sample and hold's output through a quantizer to go ahead and round them off to the nearest semitone. I have a spare disting in my cabinet, and I've got it set to quantizer mode. So let me pull that output, run my sample hold output to the input of my quantizer, then take my quantizer output to the oscillators. Now that makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Like most quantizers, this one has different scales to create different roundings off of the pitches. But rather than doing these crazy random sci-fi sounds, let's use it for something more subtle to change the timbre of the sound. For example, to change the filter cutoff. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my quantizer circuit here, reroute my oscillators to follow my keyboard pitch, and instead take that output voltage and run it up to the filter cutoff. Now you hear the filter bouncing up and down in response to the output of the sample and hold. I'll lower the center of the cutoff, and now this will give positive and negative offsets from that cutoff position. Again, I can make it go faster or slower. I can increase the level of the signal that's sampling, creating a wider voltage range on output. Or, like most sample and holds, I can also feed an external input and have it sample a different signal, something other than noise. For example, let me go ahead and grab an output from my LFO over here. So you can see what's going on. I'm going to take the output, let's say the sine wave, and plug it into the yellow trace on the data. There you see the LFO, and I'll slow it down very leisurely. And I'll use that voltage to be the sample input for sample and hold A. So let's go ahead and plug that in. Now you'll see that the green trace, the output of the sample and hold, is roughly following the outline of that sine wave. Now the cool thing about the clock rate of a sample and hold is it basically controls how accurate this conversion is. I have a very slow clock right now, so we have a very jagged output of our sine wave. But as I increase the clock speed, it's like increasing the sampling rate, and you'll more accurately reconstruct the waveform. Watch. Pink is the trace for the clock. Turn the cutoff up a little bit. Higher I go, the smoother it gets. until I'm up at audio rates and you can't really hear those steps anymore. Or we can make them quite jagged steps. Now again, the sample level controls how wide of a voltage swing is going through the sample and hold circuit. I'm obviously pushing the filter to its extremes here. I can back off on that and have a much more manageable level. It's also very common to patch an attenuator, such as one of the channels on my Levitate, after a sample and hold to the desired input, so that you can tailor exactly how much random influence you want. Slow down the clock here. Something a little bit more random. Now again, you don't always have to patch things to the most obvious destination, like pitch on the oscillators. I can run this to something a bit more subtle, such as a mixture between my A and B oscillators, which are tuned to different intervals. Now again, this is a plus or minus signal being added to the position of my mix. If I had mixed all the way down to the VCO built into the Moog, most of the time we're just hearing the VCO in the Moog because we're going under or beyond where that mix control can go. But if I center it, will now vary from that center point. I'll turn that down for now. Now there's the second sample and hold built into the URA as well, sample B. It defaults to using the internal clock. I may patch its output into the blue channel of the data so you can see what it's up to. Initially I have its noise cranked up all the way, but I don't have it patched to any destination yet. So let's take that up to the filter cutoff, since we know what that sounds like now. Again, the default input's noise going through this attenuator. I can back it off, so there's only a small variation. Or make it a very large variation. One thing that sets sample and hold B apart from sample and hold A is that it has its own slew limiter, or smoothing. See how jagged and square the edges are right now in that blue trace? As I increase its slew, look at the traces and listen to the filter. Now it's much more like a smoothly fluctuating voltage instead of something very stepped and hard. It defaults to following the internal clock, but if I want, I can patch in this external clock. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out of sample and hold A, since we're not using it right now anyway, and use this as a clock signal for the external clock, and now change how fast that blue trace, sample and hold B, is being triggered. Now we can speed it up. It's fun to do this, but in truth, the URA is built around the idea that its clock is the external driver for many different functions. I'm going to go back to the original intention here, letting the internal clock drive everything. Let's have a little bit more fun. I mentioned we could sample external inputs. We can do the same thing with sample B. I'll make it very hard transitions for right now. Take something like the sawtooth output from our LFO here. Make that the yellow trace. Slow things down a little bit so we see what's going on. And patch that voltage, which we already have going to sample input A, and move that over to sample input B. And now you see how that blue trace is doing a descending staircase following that LFO. Well, we can have even more fun by grabbing another LFO waveform, such as the ascending sawtooth, and patch that over to sample input A, which is that green trace. We'll bring that up in level. Get these out of the way so you see what's going on. And you see they're basically staircases going in opposite directions. And I'll make this a direct patch to get the yellow trace out of the way to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on, because I'm going to need that trace anyway in a second. Change the internal clock rate. Now this is a good waveform to demonstrate exactly what's going on with the toggle output. Toggle output says, well, we don't need a third sample and hold. We already have a lot of randomness. Let's flip and flop between what A is doing and what B is doing. But because we don't want the two to do the exact same thing, let's delay ourselves a little bit so we're always outputting a different voltage. I'm going to take that toggle output, put it into the yellow trace so you can see what's going on here. Let me slow things down and look closely at how that yellow trace is responding to the green and blue traces. It's jumping up and down between the green traces level and the blue traces level, but it's offset in time. That way, the toggle AB output never outputs the same voltage that A or B is outputting on the same step. And now that I have that third random output that is different than the other two, I can patch it to another parameter, such as, say, the filter resonance, which is right in here. A little bit faster. Create something quite rhythmic. Or smooth things out if we want. So we have 3 random outputs, all driven by this internal clock. Now we can play more games with that external clock. I'm going to go ahead and pull these external inputs and let A and B go back to random noise. Instead, use a sine wave out of this, going very slowly to voltage control our clock. A little bit of a tight patch here, but here we go. Now you hear it bouncing back and forth between very fast and very slow. That's a bit extreme. This is a case where you really need an attenuator to cut down on the voltage range. So I'm going to use a little RYO air attenuator here to go ahead and allow me to control just how deeply I'm FMing or changing the clock pulse and its speed. You see in the spacing of the pink pulses how the clock's speeding up and slowing down based on this LFO. And I can set the amount. Either where there's an extreme change, or just a slight variation. And this is how people create these so-called self-generative patches that just keep evolving on their own, because they have different things modulating clock rates and levels to create these variations, so it doesn't stay doing a steady drone all the time. Let me back off on our levels here. Create something more subtle here. Even slow that clock way down. So that's some ideas of what you can do with sample and holds. But the URA is far more than just a pair of sample and holds. For example, it also has a random pulse gate output and circuit to smooth that. So let's play with that in the next movie.